let's get into the big topic of open source, something that we actually say at Red Hat.
We haven't
This is so
we
awesome.
are an open culture that believes
actually
in
a big
importance of
piece
What is that process that a developer, or let's say
as the Kubernetes ecosystem really boomed.
Hello and welcome to this week's Ask an OpenShift Admin Office Hours live stream. I am co-host Mr. Andrew Sullivan, joined as always by my lovely co-host Mr. Jonny Rickard. How are you, sir?
My man, I'm doing good. It's a happy Red Hat Wednesday.
It
Exactly.
is Wednesday, and it's the heat, at least here in North Carolina, has reduced a little bit. I was actually, imagine me going for a run. I actually went for a run, and it was below 70 degrees.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, the weather keeps saying that the rest of the world is melting, but at least right here it was nice this morning. So I don't know.
Well, good on both fronts, man. That's good that you're getting out and running. I gotta ask though, how do your knees feel?
I'm old. Like let's make no joke about it. I'm old, so tomorrow it'll be a little different. I'll be regretting that decision for sure.
At least you got out, man. I'm glad you got out. That's good for you.
I'm trying. I got to do something right. I'm in my 40s now. It happens.
That's right. I keep telling myself that, but I keep like getting up and I'll like sprint to the alarm clock and hit snooze really quick and like sprint right back before I actually get cold. So I'm terrible at actually getting up and working out. So
yeah. I was reminiscing about my days in the military when we'd have to PT at like midnight because I was in Georgia, and that was the only time it was cool enough to actually be outside. It was miserable.
Man, you're not lying. When I was in Virginia, I was telling my son this, like we would go run. It didn't matter. Like if it was like 30 degrees outside, we were outside running. Like they made us run all the time. But if it was summer, apparently people can't stand being hot, so like, we would have to go inside.
I always found that funny. Yeah, it has to be like below 0 Fahrenheit before you can't be outside. But anything above 95, and yeah, you're done.
Yeah. If you're sweating while standing, they're like, no, I can't.
Good times. That was a lot of years ago, man. And I'm old. Yeah, apparently today's my reminder of that. So we are joined. It is our pleasure to welcome the team of folks from Trilio today. This is one that we've been baking for a while. Johnny's been on top of it. Thank you so much, by the way, Jonny, for being on top of scheduling lately. I greatly appreciate your help there.
Anytime, man. Doing my part.
Yeah, it's a partnership, right? It takes two. We can sing this. We could sing the song later.
Do you want to give it a shot now? Just let warm up, or
no?
Okay.
No, I feel like that's a bad idea. So thank you to the team of folks from Trilio for joining us today. This is a topic I'm excited about. For a long time, it took us 100 and something episodes to get to the point of really talking in depth about backup. And it's funny because I was at, I think, one of the very first, if not the first CNCF meeting, back right around when Kubernetes 1.0 was released, back before stateful sets existed and all that other stuff, back when they were called pet sets. And I remember being in the room with Brian Cantrell and others when they were discussing, like, does Kubernetes even need persistence? Like, should we just do away with PVs? Like, why do we need this, right? 12-factor apps, that type of stuff. And, here we are, 5-6 years later. And yeah, it turns out there's a lot of persistence in Kubernetes. I think consistently in all of the different surveys, databases, persistent databases are one of the most significant workloads, most popular workloads. Virtual machines, turns out that's a thing, OpenShift, some virtualization, KubeVirt. So lots of interesting stuff. So I'll quit rambling now, and I will introduce our Trilio team. So I'm going to start. I'm just going to go right across the row here. So Kevin, if you don't mind introducing yourself.
Yeah, hey everyone. Hi, Kevin Jackson. I'm the pre-sales solution architect director. So I manage a team of solution architects. One of them is somewhere there with me on the call, Rodolfo. I've been in IT for a long time as well. My knees don't work as well. I think it's all. But yeah, the early days of virtualization through cloud, through OpenStack, through to the joys of Kubernetes and OpenShift.
Yeah. Does it count as a run if you ride on one of those rascal scooters?
Yes, absolutely. As long as it, the Fitbit records it, it's a run.
Yeah. So
100%
Kevin,
agree.
I have to ask. It looks like you have a laser or something in behind you there. I'm trying to figure out what all that apparatus is.
Everything's better with a freaking laser, right? No, that's the telescopes.
Telescope. Okay.
Yeah, I take pictures of the night sky. So
Very cool.
Nice.
Very cool. I love to look at pictures of the night sky, but I am not skilled enough to take them. And the moon always looks very tiny when I take photos with my phone. So something with
Yes.
lenses.
Everybody should get this stuff, especially for geeks. Geeks, this is like a dream, right? This is like a whole load of tech stuff. There's computers, there's processing, there's everything is involved in astrophotography. So highly recommend it to everybody out there.
Nice.
Yeah, I'm sorry to tangent for a moment here. I'm thinking about Christmas lights. A good friend of mine here in the Raleigh area does the Christmas lights that are synced with music and all that. And he's like, "This is great. I'm like running network cables through my yard in order to be able to do this. I get to nerd out." Like, well, that feels a little extreme, but I'm happy you're having fun, Chris. Well, thank you, Kevin. Happy you're here. And Rodolfo, please introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. I work as a solutions architect at Trilio. I've been involved with operating systems like Unix, Linux all my life, especially Red Hat. I've been working, I'm still a Red Hat certified instructor, and I am enjoying the life at Trilio a lot. I love it.
Nice.
Very cool. Yeah, I come from a storage background, so all of this is near and dear to my heart. I was a storage admin, virtualization admin for a long time. Jonny, did you ever do storage? I know you were virtualization in network, I think.
No, I was like the mortal enemy to storage admins. Like they hated me. So.
Wait, what would be a mortal enemy to a storage admin?
This guy.
The SAN admin, maybe? I don't know.
Pretty much. Yeah, I just did virtualization and apps. So
yeah,
the Linux.
And then Murali, please introduce yourself. Thank you.
Thanks, Sullivan and Jonny. Happy to have you here. This is Murali Balcha. I'm the CTO and founder of Trilio.
Very cool, and thank you for joining us. I'm always interested, and it's always fun to get. I think Kevin and Rodolfo are the more technical side of things here, but it's always interesting to hear and learn about your perspective on the world and kind of where you see things going, how you're seeing adoption, how you're seeing trends going, and stuff like that. So, I'm always excited to learn about that because it sort of predicts the future, right? And supposedly that's hard.
Yeah. That's hard.
Yeah.
but then we can talk a lot about future, but not hold accountable for that. So it's fun.
Yeah. ACS people that try and defrag network drives. Yeah, that's always a fun one. I used to be a NetApp admin, so defragmenting LUNs was always a challenge with people because log append file systems. There is no such thing. Like everything is fragmented all of the time, no matter how much you defragment it. So. Yeah, fun stuff. Anyways, I think we got a short list of things on the top of mind topics this list, Jonny, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, it's gonna be pretty quick, and it's more about just the scheduling that's coming up. So next week it's gonna be me and you doing the OCP 413 and just some other stuff. Just probably just doing some like random demos across the things that are going on. And then the week after, on the 9th, next week's the 9th. On the 16th, we have the Red Hat Service Interconnect team, or AKA Scupper team, is going to come on, and we're going to talk about Scupper and Service Interconnect and all that. So, and we've got some stuff brewing behind the scenes where we're talking to some more partners to get some more people to come on, and so hopefully we can firm up some schedules with some people and have some more content coming out that's going to be relevant to everybody that's out there. So that's it for me.
Yeah, I know we've been talking quite a bit with the software supply chain folks as well. They've got a number of different topics that they are anxious to talk about, which I think is really cool. And did we start? I know we talked about it. I don't know if we've actually reached out and pinged the managed services folks.
I have not. So that's another one that we need to.
Yeah. So that's always an interesting one, right? Because, we are administrators and you think, oh, managed services, there's no role for an administrator there. Somebody else is administrating it. That's what the SREs are for. No, we still very much have a role to play. So much like automation, and I remember a decade ago having conversations about Ansible. Ansible is going to cause my job, my role as an administrator to shrink. We're not going to need as many FTEs. Why would I adopt something like this? No. It turns out that we're all still gainfully employed, so
Yeah.
not going anywhere.
I've definitely had that conversation. I remember specifically the moment that I had that conversation with one of my customers, about 3 years ago, and it was amazing. So
yeah. All right. Well, so gentlemen, I don't know which of you to address this particular question to, so I'm just going to kind of toss it out there, and I'll let you all, Hunger Games it out. So I'm always curious from our backup partners, your perspective of the world, in particular, backup with Kubernetes. Like I said a minute ago, for a minute there, even persistence in Kubernetes at all was sort of up in the air and questioned a little bit. And so when we think about applications in Kubernetes, we think about, stateless applications, we think about horizontal scale, and we think about a lot of things beyond just the pod. There's a container image, there's config maps and secrets and various other CRDs and all kinds of other stuff that all go into that. So I'm very curious to know and hear your perspective of backup with Kubernetes.
Yeah, I think Merle is a good place to start. I mean, given the history of Trilio, the grown-up world of OpenStack, I'd love to hear what Merle thinks. And I've got my own thoughts, and I'm sure Rodolfo has a gazillion thoughts as well.
Yeah, I think cloud native world obviously brought in a different way of doing things, right? And the microservices and the decomposing the big monolithic applications into manageable chunks, and then defining the interconnectivity and the horizontals and all those things, right? The backup and recovery has to have evolved, right? There is a persistence, the persistence layer is there. Like with where does the data live otherwise? If you think about it, not much has changed. If you take an Oracle application, which you basically deploy on a big beefed up server, now what we are doing is we take the same application and basically decompose that into multiple parts and then deploy it. But there is a persistent layer, right? So you still need to back up the persistent layer. But with the cloud native, the applications are very dynamic, right? You just taking the PV backup, a bunch of PVs backup doesn't really give you the whole story, because the application is changing, it's dynamic, it's controlled by the DevOps tools and the versioning. So if you don't, so the backup obviously has to change. It's not like taking a storage backup, but you need to take the application backup. Application backup that contains every artifacts of the application, so that the end user has more confidence in recovering that application no matter what. Right now, its recovery is not limited to a Linux to Linux or Linux to Windows, but it could be in a public cloud, right? On-prem to public cloud or vice versa. So the challenges are increasing for the backup and recovery because of the cloud native and the cloud in general. So we need to have a different paradigm to address these new challenges, and the open source tool like Velero started there, and then we have other commercial offerings, including Trilio, that addresses these new challenges.
Yeah, it is really interesting in that, and to your point, just backing up a PV is only a very small portion of that story.
Right.
I remember having conversations with customers about, hey, do we need to back up the container image? Well, is the version of the application that's in there important? Like, is it relevant to the persistent data and, all of that type of stuff? So it can very quickly balloon, into far more than just a simple PV. And then importantly, doing it in a storage agnostic way, whether it's a CSI managed PV or a statically managed PV, or, however that is involved in there. It's all, it's turned into a very interesting world. I will say that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think I'd add to that, because I think this, like Merle said, it's nothing's really changed in terms of like the requirements. The platform's changed. We've kind of like moved away from this infrastructure world to more of the app user-centric kind of view of the world. And even in the previous cloud generation, infrastructure as a service, I say previous, obviously it still exists, it still runs everywhere. That was the same paradigm. It was a case of like, hey, you don't need to back anything up. You can throw away your ephemeral virtual machines, until people started using the platform in a very mature way. It's the same with the Kubernetes, landscape, and certainly within the OpenShift landscape, possibly even more, being more, I guess, enterprise focused. It's, I think, there was a clear kind of like direction where this cycle always goes into. We start off with all the best intentions, like you said. Do you need to back up these applications? Hey, look, I run everything in a Git, repository, CI/CD pipelines, and you know what? That's a small bubble. People are doing that. Honestly, hats off to you. The rest of the world see this as a very standard platform with very just standard tooling with a lot of big ecosystem, and they're just taking advantage of it. And there's a big gap, certainly in the Kubernetes space, of being able to protect and, more importantly, recover those workloads in a very intelligent way.
Well, I had an interesting conversation. It's been a little while now, and Jonny, you would be interested in this, because basically what the customer was saying is, we have everything in GitOps and we have all of our code, so we just recreate the build, the pipeline, and let it redeploy. And my question was, so how long does it take to actually build the application? And is it faster or slower to just restore a container back and redeploy everything the way that it was? And then multiply that by however many applications you have running in there. If you've got 50 or 100 or 100, 1,000 applications in there, and they're all trying to rebuild at the same time, what does that mean? As opposed to these well-established and very well understood performance characteristics of doing a restore, let alone prioritization.
Yeah, and then point of time of the data is also important, right? The outage could be some ransomware attack. Outage could be some other issue. Just respinning from the CDCI pipeline doesn't really get you where you wanted, right? You just definitely need to go back point in time, a good known configuration.
And that's a good point, right? I mean, because I think that as these ransomware attacks are becoming more prevalent, right, and like we're seeing them, it sounds like we're seeing a new one every day, right? Like we do need that established like demarc point where it's like, okay, I was good up until 9:17 this morning, and 9:18 from beyond, I'm either not sure or I know I'm dirty at that point. So I need to be able to go back and make that change. And Kevin, to your point too, right? Like I think even thinking back 100 years ago when we were talking about virtual machines, the idea was like, we're not even going to have to troubleshoot. We'll just blow it away and we'll rebuild it. Like it's going to cut down on all the troubleshooting. I don't know if you remember those conversations with the guys at the fort, Andrew, where it's like, no, we're not even going to debug anything. The idea is we'll just trash it and we'll build another one. No more pets. And then 2 years later, that temporary machine is still living and breathing with certificates, and it's alive and it's forever. So we got to have this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, you're from that world. I was from that world. Where you had your separate departments of like your VM team, you had your network, you had your storage team. It was all, I wouldn't say isolated. Everybody, overuses that, like the word of silos. But you're still all friends. You're still just a wide team with specialities. But even in that context of like ephemeral based instances, there was still like the world of like additional disks. There was extra things you would need to add to these VMs to actually make them useful. Yeah. And then you run into trouble in the fact that like, yes, I can back up and get my NetApp admin to do a snap of the volumes, but what does the restore look like? The restore is hideous. If you don't have something which understands the fact this is a virtual machine with a load of extra pieces of information that's important to actually bring that back to full health again, you've got 2 or 3 people involved for something which is actually quite straightforward these days.
Yeah.
And given where the industry is going, the Red Hat, spearheading this KubeVirt or the OCP way of it, right? We're bringing in the virtual machines onto the Kubernetes. So that essentially gives you that single management plane for running both containers and the virtual machines in. And it reduces the TCO, like cost of ownership, and increase the ROI the companies. That's another reason why people need backup and recovery for the virtual machine. Most of the persistent right now exists in VM, and then you have this vehicle where people can gradually transition from VM to containers, and some applications will remain in virtual machines for quite some time, right? So there are other factors that are basically driving this backup and recovery requirement in the Kubernetes.
Yeah, I used to make a joke about how, before IBM bought Red Hat, about how, virtualization is kind of the new mainframe, right? It's not going anywhere. There's massive amounts of data, of business logic, of applications, of all these things that exist in virtual machines. And it's going to be there for a long, long time. I mean, I think we all know we can think of organizations that are still running applications on server 2012 or even earlier versions, right? Back in the, RHEL 2 and 3 days, I recently encountered a customer. That's not going anywhere. And so, providing these opportunities to continue to utilize those applications and bring them forward and let them do what they do, even though the person responsible for it may have retired a decade ago, seeing all of that come to fruition, Kubevert, OpenShift virtualization, and integrating with these, cloud native, Kubernetes OpenShift things is really cool.
Yeah, it's also true for tech workloads like telco workloads, where some components will be running on containers and some of them will still be running in VMs. So for those workloads, we still need that protection.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'll pause here to go through, and I put it in chat here. I forgot to do my normal intro into the office hours thing. Jonny, you should have called me out or just done it for me.
I was just letting it ride, man. I was just, we got into a flow.
But yeah, SG, thank you for joining. So this is one of the office hours series of live streams here on Red Hat Live Streaming. So what that means is that we are here to answer any and all of your questions. So Jonny and I represent, I'm in the BU, Johnny's on the engineering side with OpenShift. So we're happy to do as much as we can to answer any questions that you may have, kind of regardless of what the subject is. We'll do our best. If we don't know those answers, we're happy to reach back into all of the various aspects of OpenShift, whether that's product management or I don't know why we'd need to reach into marketing, but I guess we could. Marketing, engineering, so on and so forth, in order to find those answers. And if we can't do that while we're here on the stream, we'll certainly follow up. So yeah, don't hesitate to ask any questions. And of course, today with the Trilio team, we're clearly talking about backup and stuff like that. So don't hesitate to ask questions of them. And that includes if you are not watching us live, if you're listening to us recorded or watching us recorded, you can reach out to me, Andrew.Sullivan at redhat.com. And as soon as I find my tag here, so Andrew.Sullivan at redhat.com or at Practical Andrew on all of the various socials. I feel like I say this a lot lately, but Twitter is not the best way to reach me because Twitter's kind of noisy and, well, it is what it is these days. Or is it still called Twitter?
X.
Yeah. Okay. There you go. So all of the other platforms. So I am Practical Andrew, or all of the platforms I am at Practical Andrew. You can also reach out to Jonny at Jonny or Jonny at redhat.com, JONNY, or JRockTX1. And of course, we always like to point out there are 2 communities that you can communicate with us or reach out to us through as well. So the first one of those is the OpenShift users channel on the Kubernetes Slack. You can see the link down there, kubernetes.slack.com. When you join there, if you don't want to type out all of those, numbers and letters for the direct link, just search for OpenShift users. That's literally the name of the channel. And it's me and Jonny and a couple thousand of our closest friends who like to talk about all things OpenShift. And last but not least is the Red Hat user community for OpenShift, which is Commons. Although I think I saw you here, rhope9. I don't know if they've resolved the issues with the email domains that they can use there. Jonny, you were chasing that down, I think.
Yeah, I haven't heard anything. I'll have to circle back and follow up with.
Okay. So, but yeah, Commons is a great thing. Really interesting stuff. You can also go to is it commons.openshift.org? I think is their website. And you can go back and you can see all of the material from the previous Commons meetings. You can see recordings of all the presentations they've done. So it's a really great resource as well.
Yes, it's commons.openshift.org.
I thought I moved it. Michael, moved to Mastodon. I recently learned, so you know how Twitter has tweets, Mastodon has toots apparently.
Oh, really?
I thought that was amusing.
Tasks.
That's so
Don't have
awesome.
tasks.
You know.
So awesome.
R-Hope9, I saw your comment up here about Quay. Yeah, Quay can do geo-replication and all that stuff. I thought that was interesting. Okay, so sorry for the interlude there and for interrupting the flow. So I think I'm always interested in, you know, a couple of different things. So one, data protection, you know, to me, you know, you talked about like NetApp and snapshots, and many of the CSI provisioners now do snapshots. My perspective has always been snapshots are not backups. They are a point in time recovery, but you know, the underlying storage, whatever that happens to be, if it fails, you've still lost your data. So, you know, what does data protection mean to you? And I'm interested to know and see if you're able to show us, you know, what does that look like from the Trilio perspective? You know, how do we create a backup? How does it store things? How do we, you know, how do we use it? It feels like a silly basic question, right? But
yeah, so yeah, I can start on this and then probably show you bring my browser in and we can show you how it all glues together. But yeah, we take the approach of we're adding in an operator to OpenShift. So let's get that out of the way. We're an operator for OpenShift, and that provides additional functionality to all the users of that particular platform. So we share the same opinion. So obviously a snapshot is definitely not a backup. The intention for what we have is the ability to do recovery regardless of the scenario, right? So, you know, if you lost your whole cluster, you should be able to recover all your workloads to a rebuilt cluster, some other cluster in another data center. It could be from on-prem to off-prem, wherever it is, whatever your strategy is for recovery and whatever the reasons are for recovery, you should be able to do that with Trilio. So we're an extra piece of functionality. You'd be able to use us as you would normally use any process and workflow within OpenShift. So if you prefer the command line, if you prefer user interfaces, if you prefer the fact that you can, touch some files, upload some files to Git, it's all completely on the table. We don't have any extra command line clients or anything of that nature, but obviously you'd be able to drop down and use whatever you feel comfortable with.
Well, I want to pull on that operator aspect for a moment, because being an operator means that there's a CRD, which means that, you know, you're creating, so CRD, custom resource definition, it's an object, it's an instance of a thing against the Kubernetes API. And I think to your point, it means things like, so let's say I am using OpenShift virtualization. I create a pipeline that goes through and rebuilds my, you know, template virtual machine disks maybe every, 2 weeks or month or whatever. And at the conclusion of that, it kicks off a backup of that image, right? Because it's just creating an object against the API. Or, you know, my application, I'm using a pipeline, or I'm using GitOps or something like that. And I go through and I build my application. You know, maybe I run it through the ACS image scanner, you know, all that other stuff. And at the end of that, I trigger a backup of all of the objects that are related to that. You know, maybe before I go and push it into production, I trigger a backup. Like, there's all of these different ways that it integrates in a very Kubernetes cloud native type of way, which is really, really awesome.
Which is awesome.
Yeah,
add to that, I think, you know, so within the Kubernetes, yes, that's a beautiful story, right? You know, it's native, and it's we can watch and listen to events and do the right things, right? But across the clusters, fleet management, you know, that's also very important. Users not limited to one cluster; they have multitude of clusters. And how do you manage it across the clusters? Policy-driven approach is the best way to do it. You know, we do have integration with the ACM. You know, you said once, you basically by the label of the cluster or the resource, those things will be automatically protected. You don't have to do additional step when an application is deployed, right? Those policies can
I
be
didn't
defined.
even think about that. That's amazing.
Right, it's a fleet management kind of thing, right? If a cluster goes down, you can recover the cluster at the cluster level through the ACM integration. So we want to make it like once it's policy driven, once it's hard coded into the infrastructure, all the applications are taken care of by the label.
Yeah, that's really cool. I hadn't even thought about that, of the way that ACM manages, applications, which are just YAML objects.
Right.
Put a selector on it, and then every time something appears that has that label, it automatically gets protected. That's really awesome. Jonny, do you want to bring up questions?
Yeah. So Khalid had asked, with Trilio, are you able to back up to like a previous version of OpenShift? So say if you're on 4.13, would you be able to restore back to 4.12?
Yeah, I guess the answer there is a yes. Obviously, there's going to be a point where if that delta between the versions becomes too great, we're talking APIs at this point. Yeah, we're talking about version control. So there's a real world sensible thing that you would need to consider. But between say 4.12 and 4.13, minimal changes, absolutely you can revert back. In fact, that's where some of our how some of our customers utilize Trilio. There's certainly from a more of the service provider kind of world, or the managed service provider kind of world, where there's new versions that you want to test, new versions of OpenShift. You can definitely go from the old version to the new version, and then if anything goes wrong, obviously you can instantly revert back to your original cluster.
Yeah,
on the table. So even in that scenario, that was asked I've upgraded, so I've done an in-place upgrade, and I need to revert. Everything with Trilio, all the backups all get stored completely external to that OpenShift cluster. We've got everything that we need to facilitate a recovery. We don't need to have that reliance on the original CRs. We don't have any of the reliance on anything to do with that original cluster. Our backup format is all self-contained. And so we've got all the information we need to recover those Helm-based applications, the applications, deployments, the operators back onto the clusters.
Yeah, we try to stick to as much as possible to the Kubernetes API, the version upgrade, and that path. We try our best to basically provide the migration path, because even not migrating, but you may have an archival backup. Some industries, they require archival for 10 years, right? 5 years, 6 years. The APIs have moved on from newer versions, and the data may have moved on. We try to be as neutral as possible, especially when we save our backup images. But because of the nature of the backup, which includes the application metadata like YAML files, which are version bound, and then the data, which is not so much, but we try to provide the upgrade path from the older version of the API to the migration to the newer version of the API within the bounds of the Kubernetes, right? So that is one thing that we take care of it in the product.
Yeah, I think the Kubernetes API is plus or minus 2 versions, if I remember correctly.
Mm-hmm.
But I would suspect there's also things like, was it 4.9 was the first time we had a batch of APIs that were removed. So if you're moving too many versions, or let me rephrase that. It doesn't matter how many versions. If you're moving between versions where APIs are removed, and you're using one of those APIs, that clearly would not work well. Was there another?
There was one more, and it was what's the similarity between Trilio and OADP, if you know?
Yeah, I mean, I'll go first on this one, and Rodolfo and Merle can obviously, sense. But obviously, OADP, I guess, is the out of the box things you can install and give you a basic. I don't want to take too much away, but like there's a functionality level which is appropriate, that comes with OADP. It's based on Valero, and so you get a level of, I guess, a small level of comfort that it's there available for for standard OpenShift users. I think so we try and stay away from like anything about the competition. It's just everybody has their place in life. But with Trilio, I mean, look, we've got a ton of features designed for enterprise. Backup recovery across wide area networks between different clusters, from on-prem to off-prem. So from on-prem OpenShift to Rosa to Arrow, and that's just taking things in our stride. We can do things like alternative Kubernetes platforms who completely, so we're talking the Googles, the Amazons, the Azures, the pure upstream Kubernetes environments, bring them on, onboard them onto OpenShift. Again, we're designed for that level of normality across the Kubernetes landscape. And again, like I said before, there's no to learn. There's no other dependencies with Trilio. It's just grown up in the very mature enterprise space.
Yeah. I think we have OADP versus Trilio. It's not compatible because those are two different products, two different offerings. We tend to be more responsive to the market needs, customer needs. We need level of control over like how we can innovate and to address the market needs. So I think it's two different offerings, but we tend to be more focused on enterprises and the scale and the level of integration that we want to bring into the ecosystem, ease of use, right? So we consider a lot of other factors, but there are two different offerings right now. There is no compatibility.
Yeah, on top of what Kevin and Murali said, I see OADP plus Velero as a data mover. Yeah, it's one option. It's a backup of maybe same cluster. It has some limitations compared to us. Okay, we are built for the enterprise. We see customers that are happy with Velero. They're doing backups and restores on the same cluster. No need to do any migration to a different public cloud or a cluster with different resources. That's fine. But if you want to do something else, then you need enterprise tools. Okay, and we see customers with that need. And I speak a lot to Red Hat SAs, and they always come with the OADP plus Velero on the hand. And when I explain to them what Trilio is, what we can do, the nice features we have, the simplification, how we simplify stuff, and how we can automate stuff, they absolutely love it. And they really understand the difference between the offering from OADP and Velero and Trilio.
Yeah, you all three kind of said the same thing, which was what I was thinking in my head of, hey, use the solution that best fits your needs and works and delivers all of the features, all the capabilities that you need. We were talking before the stream started about like incremental backups. Yeah. That's really cool, because you don't think about, there is no, so far as I know, there's no change block tracking inside of the CSI paradigm. So, that's really cool to be able to, get incremental backups and be able to take advantage of that from a space savings, how quickly you can back up things, all of that, speed of backups is always a huge one. That was always one of the challenges.
Once you start talking about the incremental backup, the things that comes into mind is, what is the forever incremental, right? If you set up a retention policy of 30, and then you have the first backup and then 29 incremental backups, what happens on the 31st? And you synthesize the full backups and the backup media itself, not to take the full backup. So there's additional optimizations and the performance optimization that comes into once you start doing the incremental backup and how you manage the incremental backups. So those are all part of the enterprises that tend to expect from the backup vendors, right? That we do well with our offering.
Yeah. So first, thanks to the audience for all the questions. Please keep them coming. And Jonny, I see you're soliciting future ideas for stream topics. So
that's right.
Anytime and every time, right? We're 100 and something episodes in, so anytime we can get content ideas, we love it.
Absolutely.
And at this point, we should probably go back and revisit a bunch of the early ones because 60 episodes was like 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, something like that. Lots changed. So Kevin Rodolfo, I don't know. Do you have a system or an example that we can see?
Yeah, I was going to say just as a kind of like general excuse. ACM's mentioned as a future thing. What I'll do is I'll load up a browser and just as a pure excuse to show ACM integration, and I can talk through what happens during our backups. So I'll force a violation, and then obviously it'll take you through the backup process and allows you to see some of the features on there. So what I'll do is I'll just share one of my browsers. Hopefully this won't look a bit too awful. let me make sure I'm choosing the right. I should have closed about 1,000 of my my browsers, so I choose the right one here.
I did the same thing this morning. I went through and cleaned out all of my tabs, and suddenly my system's operating much better. I don't know.
Dude, I was like, why does my computer act like just a turd right now? And I was like, oh, wow, okay, maybe having 4 windows with 80 tabs open is a bad idea. Who knew?
It may help if you stretch horizontally your browser there.
Yes. Remember your little tip. Now keep going. There we go. That'll look a bit better. Hopefully it looks okay on everybody's screen. Obviously, this is, if you're not familiar with ACM, obviously I'm not an ACM salesperson. So what I've got here is just basically the basics. So I've got ACM installed on a particular cluster. As you can see, it's only a small environment that I'm managing. In fact, I've only got a single cluster that this is actually basically governing right now. We call it OCP DC3 because we're really great at naming our clusters. So if I just go into policies, we'll see the fact that, again, I loaded the full set of Trilio policies. We've done a lot of work with the policy management with ACM. We have a blog post. What we'll do is we'll make sure the link is in the chat so you can share to the rest of the team and the audience. But basically, we've got a full set of being able to do some fancy things with ACM. I've got a basic thing here where I've done a basic installation of Trilio. So one of the policies that you can download immediately and install into ACM is an ability to of course do some of the most basic things that you would expect to do when it comes to governing your environment. We take the stance of when it comes to governance, we have the mentality from the Trilio point of view is there will be a number of requirements that you would need to have as part of your policies, to make sure that your systems are, say, production ready. Obviously, we're backup and recovery, so the policies that we have will go along the lines of if a brand new cluster has gone online, it must have this piece of software installed, it must have this application installed, et cetera, et cetera. So our stance is you must have the ability to do backups. So, of course, we can self-install TUK. So, again, just doing the normal things you would expect with ACM. If we look through the policy where you can nominate machines, to apply this policy to, you'll have machines that are in violation, and then you can have ACM, of course, remediating by pushing and installing Trilio, the operator, against the governed and configured configuration that is, that particular company requires. So that's the install TPK, and then we've got a second policy, which is, in this case, you can see here, it's just very basic. It's one that does a namespace backup. There's no limitations on this. We can do an application level backup. We can do a Helm-based backup. We can do whatever you need to have. Of course, just for the time and the expedience, there's a backup here, and basically it is just doing a basic namespace backup of basically a small application on that machine was called DC3. DC3, again, just very quickly, that's DC2. You can see we name our machines absolutely brilliantly. But DC3...
We do the same. It's okay.
I'm logged in as admin, by the way. I've also cheated as well. So again, that's not a requirement from Trilio. I should point that out as well. This is my faithful application. This is our faithful application. 3 nodes at the front end, a MySQL server with a persistent volume at the back end. Now, because I'm sharing my browser, I should have actually shared my whole screen. What I'm going to do is, let me go back to this. In fact, I'll do it from here. So this is the ACM screen. I've not introduced you to the Trilio interface at the moment. This is the Trilio interface. So this is as part of the installation of Trilio. What happens, because we're an operator, wherever you would require the features and functionality of being able to back up and recover your workloads, or whether there are deployment of containers, whether they're virtual machines, however it is, basically you would need our operator installed on each and every one of those clusters. So of course, that's where ACM comes into its own. You can have this where all of my clusters are governed by ACM, and we can always make sure that the right version and with all the right policies are already configured. The policy here, in fact, I can go into the policy. This policy here is all, as you say, it's not in violation. What this backup does is, this policy does is it creates a backup, and it basically checks, is there a valid backup that is available? That valid backup is over in on this particular cluster, which one? DC3. This is where I'm meant to go, DC3. So, as you can see, our user interface is multi-cluster aware as well. So I can actually manage all my clusters from this single pane of glass. If I go into my backup plans over here, that policy created a backup plan. A backup plan in Trilio basically says, what am I going to back up? So you would define a backup plan to back up your three namespaces. You define a backup plan that will back up the two Helm-based installations within a namespace, or these three virtual machines. That's what a backup plan is. And in that back plan, it also says, where am I going to store my data? And again, bear in mind, the snapshots are not backup. So of course, we're storing this to what we call a target. And in this case, just for everyone call, this is just going to go out onto the internet to an S3-based target. We support any S3-based storage, whether it's internal or external, and NFS or blob storage on some public clouds. So in here, I can see my backups. If I go to view backup and restore summary, I've got a backup here. You can say TDK backup, and from this point, I can do a restore. So I can do a restore back to this original cluster. So if I deleted this particular namespace, I can come in and say, hey, look, I'm going to do a restore of this particular application. And bear in mind that this was a backup that was created in ACM. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete this this backup, and that will essentially force a violation with ACM. Bear in mind that ACM is there to govern and make sure that your basically everything is not in violation. You can say, look, there's a cluster violation. That's because this particular policy, bear in mind these are policies, this policy said you must have at least one backup available of this particular application, or in this case, this particular namespace. So this is actually in violation. You can go into, if you're not familiar with ACM, I'm sure everybody on the call are, you can see the fact that we can have this running history of like, okay, something isn't there and it should be, so therefore I need to remediate. And so what's happening at this point is it's talking to Trilio, and it's actually performing a backup. So we can see here, if I go into, it's starting the backup there, I'll show you a view. If I go into monitoring, we can see we've got a backup in progress. And this is our backup that's occurred. So I didn't press any buttons. All I did was obviously I deleted, because we're using something which is controlled through Advanced Cluster Management system. And as I say, essentially it was in violation, so therefore it's remediated, and then it will be all happy once this is completed. Now, just whilst I'm on this, and I don't want to talk too much, but this does actually show like a lot of the moving parts of Trilio. But this goes back to, I guess, some of the opening conversation that we had in terms of why backup, and why not just leave the backup to, say, a storage team. At the end of the day, we're attaching persistent volumes from maybe some ODF, or maybe some other system from IBM, or from NetApp, or wherever. Can't we just let the storage team handle this? And the point being is you just can't. You could recover that data from a storage view of the world coming out back into the world. It's kind of like it's just some storage, but to us, it's an artifact. It's a dependency of your complete application. And you can see here we go through the process of capturing the application plus the data as well.
Yeah, it's interesting to me to see this maturation around, kind of, I'm going to blanket it under infrastructure as a service, but allowing application teams, developer teams, to manage their entire application and all the things it depends on. So, the world I grew up in as a virtualization administrator, I owned vSphere. When I needed storage, I went and talked to the storage team. When I needed backups, I went and talked to the backup team. When I needed a network connection, I talked to the network team, right? So on and so forth. And, when we're talking about modern applications, especially when they're, many of these app teams are used to platforms like AWS and Azure and all this, they can just self-serve. And that includes backups, and being able to go in and granularly control, when they get these things restored, as opposed to, Jonny, you worked with a lot of the same people I did back in the day. Hey, I need this restored. Okay, we'll put in a ticket, and it'll be somewhere between 24 and 48 hours.
Yeah, if we don't lose it.
Assuming it restores, right? Because backups are worthless and restores are priceless.
Exactly.
Yeah, not what we see on the field is not all businesses are that mature, right? So we have the both options. We can have a central backup team managing all this, or we can delegate those tasks to the developers, or just the Trilio backup team can give a YAML file to put in your GitOps workflow, so you will deploy your application plus your backup strategy at the same time with zero effort.
Yeah. I like that you pointed out the hybrid approach of you can have a central administrator who kind of keeps an eye on things broadly, or you can entirely, delegate if you so choose. Vasco asked a question. Can you back up CRDs like Kubert?
Well, yeah. So, I mean, so backing up the CRDs, you can back up additional CRDs through tracking backup all objects, any additional objects that you've got access to. We can back up certainly virtual machines as part of Kubert itself as well. So again, it can take you through that particular process. In fact, whilst on the topic of Kubert and OpenShift virtualization, I'll take you through, I guess, that process as well. Funnily enough, it doesn't change. It certainly doesn't change much. Obviously, the integration point or the trigger point for what I just showed you there was an excuse to talk around ACM. But ultimately, all these are just standard calls, standard API calls that you would expect to see against, in our case, the Trilio operator and the Trilio CRDs. So when our approach to virtual machines was no different either. This application I showed you was a few containers. When I show you the backup, in fact, I'll just show you the backup completed backup plan on another system. So if I go to I'm still in DC3. So if I go to here, and I've got here we go. Here's a VM backup. If I look at the VM backup screen again, I won't go through an actual backup of a virtual machine, just because it looks precisely the same. We're doing the same kind of process. We're going through and we're talking around capturing the additional details around the virtual machine itself, like the metadata. We'll go through like quiescing the disk. We've got VMs are different, to volumes and containers. VMs are disks. There's you can't get away from the fact that there is a machine image associated with this particular thing. It's a traditional QEMU KVM based image. So we go through and understand that. We understand all the additional persistent volumes that are attached. It's all just very normal, and you end up in precisely the same scenario. The difference being, I can show you through if I go through this particular process here, I can say protect a specific virtual machine. So I can go through this process where it'll identify, because I'm admin, it's now browsing through all the namespaces for virtual machines. If you logged in as an ordinary user, which I expect everybody on the call does things in a more appropriate fashion, then obviously it would only list your virtual machines that you only have access to, your ownership. But you can see here, I can say, okay, I want to protect this particular virtual machine, for example. Remember I said before about a backup plan. It's another CR for us. So a backup plan says, what am I going to protect? There will be no surprises leading into a demonstration. I've pre-set up some of these things. And this backup plan basically says, I'm going to protect this particular virtual machine. So that's why it already knows that I've already created what we call a backup plan. Because, hey, you can use this one, which is already pre-configured with the target already preset and all the additional details. And I can go through this process of like the VM backup. one, I give it a name. I can have full or incremental. I'll make an incremental backup from this. I'll start this off. This is going to take about 5 or 6 minutes to do. But it's a good excuse, again, to keep talking about what we actually do during this particular process. That metadata piece, that's all that detail of all the metadata associated with the virtual machines, the kind of, the name and the spec, any of the spec information, all that detail that you would expect as part of that spec. It will then move on to the data piece. And as I say, we've got this ability to do incrementals. And so we have a process behind the scenes where we can do that comparison. We can do that understanding of like what was backed up previously, and only write out the difference between the last backup. So like you said, change block tracking doesn't exist. So we have this mechanism to understand using our particular format, and our format is QCOW2. And QCOW2, native format for a lot of virtualization systems, it has an ability to have these additional incremental disks, these overlay disks associated with it. And it gives us the ability to have this phenomenal ability to do these fast incremental backups.
Yeah.
So one thing real quick before we move on, just to highlight what you were saying a minute ago about the RBAC and virtual machines, right? That's universal, right? So like as long as you have access to that resource within your namespace, or maybe you've even been given RBAC to see like a cluster level resource, as long as you can see it with your account that you're running the backup with, then you'll be able to back up that thing. It's not like you're gonna have, if you're the Jonny namespace admin, you're gonna have access to everything. It's literally gonna be, you're gonna be locked into your box, right? So you're not gonna have carte blanche access to the world.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then I'm sorry, I've got a bunch of questions, but I'll try and like button these up. Does this support disconnected? Like I'm assuming that as long as I can get the operator on my cluster, and as long as my operator can talk to a storage, then it'll work, right? Is there any like phoning home or anything like that, or is that like a roadmap thing or whatever?
Yeah, no, it's you do this wherever you need to have this installed, because it's self-contained. So yeah, there's no call home, there's no dependency on an external service. We have a lot of clients and customers who are deep behind enemy lines, behind firewalls, that have this installed. So you're right, as long as you've got access to be able to do the operator-based install, however you're syncing your registries, how you create your registries, you'll be able to get Trilio installed.
Yeah, and in fact, this offering is available in the Operator Hub, so it makes it even easier.
Yeah, should come across as a standard catalog mirror.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask, is there any dependencies on storage? Like, do you have to use a CSI provisioner that can do snapshots, or is there anything like that?
Yeah, the requirement there is the storage presented up is CSI for one, and that they'd be able to support volume snapshots. We have the ability to, when we back up the application and you have non-CSI based storage, we have the ability to understand the fact that storage exists. We don't back up that storage, that process just doesn't exist. We don't have that additional bloat. The resource usage from Trilio is kept quite low because we don't have to, Merle can speak a lot more, around this. But my interpretation is, we don't have that bloat. We didn't have to have the so-called legacy storage built into our system. It was purely designed from day one, for CSI. Merle, I don't know if you want to talk any more around that.
Yeah, so our solution depends on the CSI snapshot functionality, right? The other thing is, when it comes to backup, it is the data, and we copy lots of data, right? The dedupe is one of the things that people employ, but dedupe usually comes with hefty cost, because the chunks and the unique chunks and then lookups and then consolidation and cleaning up the so it's a lot of bookkeeping that happens. So our backup process is more efficient because it uses the standard QCOW images and the overlay, and the QCOW itself is space efficient. It doesn't store zeros, and then you can overlay incremental backups on top of it, but still you have the view to the complete backup at that point in time, right? So we employ most of the standard features that are available in the Linux to make our backups a lot more efficient. Yeah, but it do rely on the CSI snapshot functionality. We don't support non-CSI volumes.
Mm-hmm.
And I know we'd mentioned earlier, like pretty much any like object storage, you guys can connect to. But like I have customers that, or I'm sorry, I had customers that were very heavy NFS, right? And I know you mentioned NFS. Like there's some respects where that's supported. Like, what are some of like what's the floor and ceiling of NFS support, right? Is it like enterprise class storage only? Like we only support NFS as long as it's on like a NetApp or an EMC or something like that. Not some real VM that's hosting an NFS share.
Yeah, we do support any NFS. I think we support NFS v3 and v4 protocols. As long as they are NFS compatible and the S3 compatible, we support them. We don't make any distinction between one vendor versus other vendor.
Yeah, you mentioned dedupe. I would imagine that if you're sending the backup data to something that does dedupe, it can do
it can still use that. So we do support, for example, EMC data domain, like a Dell data domain. Once our images are stored on the global dedupe that data domain, people do benefit, but our backups and incremental backups are efficient because we don't send duplications within a particular VM, right? But across the VMs, we can't dedupe because it's intensive. So there you can get some optimizations if you use data domain dedupe.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. On the topic of targets, apologize that just refreshed and just kicked me out. Lovely tokens. So on the topic of targets, we have an ability, and it goes back to this idea of your backups are everything we have in terms of backup is self-contained on that target storage. So as you can see, we've got multiple clusters configured in here. I can go onto any of my clusters. I was on DC3 just then, for those that were following at home. When we add targets to another cluster, something great happens. I'll show you the basic feature, and then I'll probably hand it over to Rodolfo to show you an advanced feature of this. But if I just look over here, if I just find my restore namespace, not my restore target, how about my restore namespace? I'm a professional, really. So if I go in here, I've got a target already set up. Again, demonstrations. This is the backup target. So if you think of architecture, you've got your Kubernetes cluster. We're now making a backup completely external to your OpenShift cluster. This is onto what we call a target. So in your world, that would be a NFS enterprise storage or S3 bucket somewhere. You own these targets. That's where your backups exist. And in this case, I've added that exact same target to a second cluster. So I've got my original cluster. I've now got a second cluster. They can actually see that same piece of storage. And we have this ability to do what's known as target browsing. I can see my backups directly from that target storage at that point. And so at this point, so I was backing up those VMs before. So I was backing up that particular VM. That one of those VMs is still in progress. But so that's why it's not appeared here just yet. We have a little process. We'll go through and walk the tree and actually update this particular target. So whilst that backup is still occurring, I should point out the architecture as well. This is a little mini environment, and we're writing out to an Amazon S3 based storage. So there's internet involved when we're doing backup recovery. So for those that are watching on, I guess after the live event on YouTube, just put it on to 1.5 times the speed, and you'll be good.
So I want to poke at that and highlight what I think you just said. So each backup target is effectively self-contained. So even like all of the metadata that you need in order to do a restore exists inside of there. So at any point in time, you can spin up a new cluster, you can point it at that target, and you can begin restoring applications, whatever's backed up into there. You don't need to copy or replicate some sort of backup database or any other sort of, you don't need the source backup definition or anything like that.
Exactly.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, absolutely. So, and like here, so I just selected that one of those backups from that backup plan set. So you can see they're just normal backups. You have a workload, a backup plan is what we call it, and in there you've got a series of point-in-time captures of your environment, and I've just chosen one of them. And I'm now going to do that recovery. I'll leave this running, and we'll probably might come back to this. This is going to be a recovery of that virtual machine, and it's actually going now to an alternative cluster. So I've now got the ability to do backup from VMs from one cluster and be able to restore those VMs onto my second cluster.
Yeah. And we all validate our backups, right? We all do test restores to make sure they work every time.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, it's phenomenal, right? Because we've all grown up in that world where you hear of the stories of like, I've got backups, and then they've come to use those backups, and then they're unusable. The tools like Trilio, where it's part of your system, start to become part of your daily sort of orchestrated life. This tool, there's no additional overheads. There's no arduous kind of like task to say, okay, I can have an automated system running that will automatically recover my environment, run through a number of checks, and then maybe just destroy the environment. You can even get to a stage where it's spinning up a brand new OpenShift cluster. It's installing Trilio for Kubernetes. It is then doing a recovery of an application, all tests pass, and it all just gets thrown away again.
I love that idea. That idea is amazing. I said pipelines before. Use a pipeline or use even ACM to have it. Hey, once a week, deploy a whole new cluster to restore the entire application, and then whatever it takes to validate that the application is functioning as expected. Hey, look, everything worked, and now we can tear everything down, and we have validated our backups. One thing that comes to mind, does this, I assume that you can use service accounts and stuff like that. And where I'm thinking is, what was the company? There was a company that a few years ago that their AWS account got compromised, and they were backing up all of their data with the same credentials that they were using to run all of the data. So the attacker basically went in and deleted everything, both their live data as well as all of their backups. So I'm wondering if, there's RBAC or something like that you can use to help mitigate those things.
Yeah, I mean, there's additional things around that anyway. So obviously, I'll answer this, and Merle can chime in on the security aspect of this. But certainly, I've logged in here as kubadmin, and obviously that's not recommended. I realized the fact, like, hey, look, I'm showing this stuff, and I'm like, hey, straight away, I'm like, I violated, step number one. So yeah, in this case, admin, is a little bit free form. So yeah, from a user point of view, they are your backups. So you are independent. Your backups are independent of anything else on that particular system. But to govern additional control over that, regardless, we support the ability to do immutability and the ability to encrypt those backups. So I appreciate that. Like, logging into the account is logging into the OpenShift account, and once you've done that anyway, there's a conversation of like, well, you were already compromised at that point. But there's no separate authentication from the Trilio point of view. So
yeah. Somebody asked me the other day that if somebody had root access to CoreOS, can you protect them from making changes to the system? Like, well, that's the point of root. Root has access to everything. I feel like if they have roots, it's too late.
Yeah, especially with an OpenShift.
But I think backups has a different level of protection that they need to bring in, right? If the platform is compromised and the backups are compromised, then where do the user go, right? So the object immutability is one of the features that we have where once a backup is taken on a platform on a particular cluster, it doesn't have the ability to modify those backups, no matter what, whether it's a root or anyone, right? Yeah. So that is a level of protection that we bring in with object immutability feature. And So that's one thing. So I think if I step back like a couple of minutes of discussion, you talked about testing the backups and ACM, one of the few things that you dropped. What we have, that feature that we haven't talked it. I can briefly mention that it is called continuous restore that we shipped last Q3 Q4 timeframe last year, and essentially what this one does is it can support the fan out and fan in feature if you have numerous clusters and you have the DR requirement. And if an application needs some kind of staging of the latest backup onto the remote cluster and a policy based through ACM, or set of backups that need to be staged just for recovery purpose for other use cases. So through some policy on the backup plan object, user can choose a remote cluster to be a staging area for a backup. And as soon as the backup is completed on the remote cluster, we stage the entire data and the artifact. So through ACM, we can verify whether the backups are valid or not. So we do have this additional, the new feature called continuous restore that we shipped last Q3.
That's really cool. I like that concept because, I'm thinking of OpenShift and how subscriptions work. You can use cold and warm DR,
yes,
and you don't have to pay for entitlements. It's only hot DR that you have to have entitlements. So I'm thinking using something like that, I can now have my DR cluster, which is scaled way down, but I've got everything that's ready to go, so that basically all I need to do, the only thing I'm waiting on is for nodes to be added to the cluster, and instantly workload spins back up. That's really cool.
Absolutely. So it provides a great RTO, but RPO again, it depends on how frequently the backups are scheduled. Yeah, sorry.
No, that was my fault. Is there like a trial license or subscription? I'm so used to Red Hat terms. Like, is there like a trial sub or like the free sub, right? Like, what's the one that the guy can go out, or gal, the person can go out and kick the tires with Trilio, maybe in their home lab or in like a small environment?
Yeah, we have the ability to do free trials. I mean, obviously, we like you to contact us to actually go through that particular process. So if there are people on the watching this and listening, just reach out to any of us. In fact, genuinely use the chat bot. I know usually those things that pop up on the website, people stay away from them. But you actually get to a human after probably the first 1 or 2 clicks. But that you would get through to genuinely to us. And certainly my team, it's my team that would be fielding that request.
Yeah.
And then if there's any additional need, it's very simple to install and very simple to use. But certainly for our enterprise type customers, we do a lot of hand holding, just because. But for everything else, we'll take it as it is. But yeah, reach out to us and we'll be able to have those conversations.
Awesome.
Very cool. Yeah, so I know we're coming up on the hour and 15-minute mark, and I know for most of y'all, you're in a much later time zone than Jonny and I are. Plus, I got a plane to catch this afternoon, so that'll be fun. So for the audience, first, thank you for all the questions that we've had so far. Please don't hesitate to ask any of those. You can keep asking questions right up until I think the stream ends. If we just happen to be after we click the button to end it and all that other stuff, we'll follow up with you. You can also, again, reach out to me directly, andrew.sullivan@redhat.com. As soon as I find my little tile here to show my name, andrew.sullivan@redhat.com, or you can reach out to Jonny, Jonny @redhat.com. So we're happy to take all those questions, again, whether you're watching us live or not, and we will follow up with the Trilio team to make sure to get those answered. But yeah, really, thank you so much, everybody, for all of the questions that we've had. It's been really great. I always learn new things when we come to these things, and like incremental backups with VMs by utilizing QCOW2 and the underlying format and the stuff that's available there. That's super cool to me. So thank you. I really appreciate it. So, oops, I forgot to turn off Jonny's name there. Send all of the messages, all of them to Jonny. Jonny loves email.
Go ahead. I'm in email jail as it is, so it's not gonna hurt.
Yeah, all of the marketing emails, especially. Jonny loves those.
Really do.
We get them whether we want them or not. So again, so to the audience, don't hesitate to ask questions. To the Trilio team, thank you for coming on. This has been super helpful, super educational. I feel like I always say that I look forward to these topics, and that's because, well, I get to weigh in, and we only get to choose topics that we like. But this one has been really, really educational. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, welcome. Thank you.
With that, I don't have anything else. Do you all have anything? Kevin, Rodolfo, Merle, anything that you want to add?
No, I think I think kind of weirdly, I think we've only just like scraped the top of the surface. For things, it's amazing how quick the time goes. And I reckon everybody in Trilio will know the fact that I talk too much. So I apologize profusely for everybody who was listening to me for probably.
No, you did fine, Kevin. You did fine.
He's just being nice.
I should come with a disclaimer, and I apologize. But yeah, there's some great stuff that we've got in the pipeline. So yeah, we'd love to join you guys again. So
yeah.
Absolutely, that's what we're here for. Jonny, I'll leave last words with you while I figure out which one of these buttons to click for the video.
All right, right on. Yeah, hey, just ditto what Andrew said. Thanks for coming on. The UI, the backup experience, everything, like it's super clean. It's cool to see the demo walking, through end to end. And like, man, it's cool to see what you guys are doing, because like we've had a couple other storage vendors on, and they're everybody's doing cool stuff, right? But you got like that nice little. You got like that little bit of extra stuff, and I think that's awesome. And I'm all about a clean UI, so good job on that. We'd love to have you guys come back whenever you guys got something new coming out, because it's really interesting to us, for Andrew and I as nerds, but then for our audience, where there's people that are out there trying to find a solution for them, and to come out here and show what you got, it kind of gives them a place to start. So again, thanks for coming on. We really appreciate it. And yeah, hopefully we'll see you again.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you.